While China claims to have conquered COVID as the United States runs ahead of schedule in its inoculation drive, let's talk about India, where the race to vaccinate is a race against time. This in a nation hit hard by virulent new strains. We'll ask about nighttime curfews, weekend lockdowns that citizens here in Europe can certainly relate to. We'll also ask about the new wave hitting places like Mumbai and Delhi, the whole world waiting on the planet's leading producer of pharmaceuticals, particularly with that pause on exports of vaccines that won't be lifted till June at the earliest. And yes, this tale of fragile global supply chains does involve AstraZeneca. As for India itself, we're talking about a major test for a nation that till recently boasted the world's highest growth rate. What strategy to rebound in a post-pandemic world? The IMF's latest growth projections are positive for this year, but there's also a growing gap between economies that beat COVID fast and those that are taking longer. What will it all mean in the end for ordinary citizens? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking if India's up to the challenge. And joining us from the capital, Rajiv Dasgupta. He chairs the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Thank you for being with us.
Hello. Thank you.
Also with us from New Delhi, Rajat Sethi, advisor to the Chief Minister of the northeastern border state of Manipur. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's nice to see Divya Rajagopal, Senior Assistant Editor at the Economic Times again. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
And from Washington, Irfan Nuruddin, you are Director at the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council, a think tank. Your books include Elections in Hard Times. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and on Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, those new strains are no joke. India this week overtaking Brazil in terms of daily infections, topping the 100,000 a day mark. It's younger people catching COVID in this latest spike. Divya, you're in Mumbai, which is where we first heard about this double mutant variant. What's it like as you head towards a weekend of lockdown?
Well, it's a weekend lockdown. It's night curfew, as you rightly said. The beaches are shut down, and most of the city has gone back to what it was perhaps last year in May. So most things are shut in Mumbai right now, and only essential services are working. So it is definitely a worrying situation. And this time we're seeing the new infections are coming from high income zones. And these were the zones which did not get infected last year. And you see the spread happening in those places where the people who thought that they are immune to the virus are suddenly finding that they are not, and they're getting infected. So if you look at the new cases that's coming up, it's from the high income group.
Rajiv Dasgupta in the capital, same story?
Yes, as far as Delhi and the adjoining areas go, the daily new cases have been rising quite dramatically. The point about Maharashtra, where Mumbai is located, and Punjab, two of the very high incident states, particularly in this current phase, as we were discussing earlier, the new variants of concern possibly are playing a greater role than is being acknowledged or perhaps recognized and paid due attention to. This rising phase also coincides with the global spread, certainly of the UK variant, plus the homegrown double mutant, which is now diagnosed recently in the San Francisco Bay Area by the Stanford University in the last 48 hours. So the double mutant has certainly been exported, as it seems, and the UK variant imported. And this certainly has a bearing not just on the rapid spread, but some districts of Punjab actually hitting the 5% mortality mark, which is a full percentage point above the CDC's 4% benchmark of mortality. So overall, as far as cases and deaths go, there seems to be quite a few difficult weeks, if not months ahead.
a few weeks, months ahead, and yet there's criticism of the measures taken by the government. In the capital, in particular, there's skepticism over that idea of a nighttime curfew.
I don't think it's going to have any effect. Because most people who are going to get COVID are going to get it in the day when they're out and about in any place. The night curfew is not going to change anything much.
I think there should be more rules about like social distancing and people gathering at one place. There should be a rule about it.
There should be a rule about people gathering at one place. Rajat Sethi, your reaction to that?
Well, I think over the past few months, when India was comfortably placed in terms of controlling the COVID outbreak, there was a sense of fatigue around following rules and going by the government's protocols, etc. And I think seeing this sudden spurt of number of cases of COVID, the government thought that it would be better to send up behavioral cues to change people's behavior, make them more aware that COVID and COVID's impact is still there. It is still a serious matter, and all of us, especially the citizenry of all the prominent metros and the states which are going under night curfews, should understand and realize that the war isn't over. And I think the government just wants to point this out. Today, Prime Minister's address to all the chief ministers also said that it is important for people to understand that the battle isn't won yet, and we all have to be cognizant and well aware about the precautionary protocols that the government has put in place. And I think it is in this context.
What you're saying is that the nighttime curfew is to raise awareness?
That is right. That is right, because the government still thinks that we don't have the luxury of imposing a stringent lockdown that the government did in the previous huge wave of COVID that was almost a year back. Therefore, this can be a lesser costly lockdown, but does increase the amount of awareness that people require at this stage in order to remove the fatigue around COVID, and people start embracing those those basic protocols of wearing masks, not going out in gatherings, etc., which we have seen that over the past few months, people had been a little more carefree when it came to COVID. So I think this will,
Yeah, I was going to put it to Irfan Nuruddin. You agree that, and I've heard this from across the political spectrum in India, that you just can't shut down India anymore like the way you did last year.
Well, I'm not sure that that's entirely true. I mean, at the end of the day, the central government has shown a tremendous lack of leadership and a lack of vision. That is partly, I think, poor policy making. That is partly genuine constraints on what they can and cannot do. There are mixed messages being sent across the board. On the one hand, in the city of Bombay, you have a lockdown now that's even contemplating whether or not mask wearing should be required in private vehicles. At the same time that the Prime Minister and the Home Minister and the opposition, of course, are hosting huge rallies of thousands, tens of thousands of people, none of whom are wearing masks. This is happening simultaneously to a discussion about lockdowns and night lockdowns. So the notion that the government is speaking with one voice is on its face incorrect. India also just tremendously has underinvested in actual data. The truth of the matter is we have no idea how bad the situation is. Delhi, Punjab, Maharashtra and Kerala are among the highest number of cases. Those are, by any definition, by any indicator, among the best governed states in India. They're also all opposition-controlled states. The notion that Uttar Pradesh, that Bihar, that the northern states of India, which tend to be poorer, less well-governed, don't have similar cases is simply, I think, a fiction, and one that is maintained by very low testing rates that is masking the tremendous issue that is afflicting the country. We do not know actually how many deaths have occurred because the data are simply spotty and unreliable. And the final point just to make for the conversation in terms of the economy, the government has hamstrung itself. It does not have the fiscal capacity to provide the income support that is necessary to go along with any sort of real lockdown measures. Yes, is there fatigue? Of course there is fatigue. But the fact of the matter is that 500 million people require daily wages as a way of survival. And the Indian government does not have the means or the capacity or, in fact, the will to actually do what it would be required to provide them the support so that they can stay at home and get through what has to be gotten through.
I want to get back to that point.
Yes, is this a difficult problem? It is, but a real failure.
I want to get back to that point about what kind of a stimulus plan, what kind of support from the state for people who are struggling a little bit later on. First, though, Rajat Sethi, do you agree that campaign rallies should be banned?
Well, if you look at the COVID spread across India's various states, you will realize that the states that are going into elections are certainly not the hotspots. Also, if you talk about some of the bigger states like Uttar Pradesh, etc., Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, which have already seen, Bihar was one state which went into elections just recently in the month of October. And there too, there were several election rallies and there wasn't a big spike in the number of cases. So there were data points early on. And let me tell you one more thing. Just a month back, India had really controlled and flattened the COVID curve pretty well. There were less than 100,000 cases across the whole country. And therefore, even the politicians of the day thought that they could go through the election campaigns and conduct these mass rallies. But I think going forward, they will have to be much more careful in terms of ensuring social distancing as well as ensuring other protocols are strictly followed in these state elections. Mind you, most of the state elections, several important phases are already over. There's just one state election which is going to drag on for another 15 odd days. And I'm sure there'll be stricter protocols in those phases of election.
Rajiv Dasgupta, you agree?
No, there are multiple facets to it. A number of doctors' associations have actually made this point rather emphatically that the Election Commission is not really as vigilant as it ought to be in terms of political rallies. When you can't have more than 100 or 200 persons or invitees for a marriage across most of the states, how can you really have 100,000 people, hundreds and thousands of people in election rallies? These outlier examples notwithstanding. So that's a concern that, as I said, many doctors' associations have argued with the Election Commission. But the point is that, as Mr. Sethi said, if the nocturnal lockdown acts as a stimulus for behavioral change, I shall put my optimist hat on, and I would certainly hope that Mr. Sethi is right. But putting on a realist epidemiologist's hat on, it certainly wouldn't slow down things spectacularly. And finally, lockdown decisions ought to be taken on the basis of the extent to which health services are coming under strain, which therefore is a town-by-town, district-by-district situation, rather than a broad sweep decision at a state or a national level.
All right, the new spike is worrying investors. The rupee dropping to a 4-month low against the U.S. dollar this week after the announcement of those new restrictions. Divya Rajagopal, how spooked are investors by the current spike?
Well, it's definitely concerning, and the concerns come from the fact that there might be another national lockdown that might be coming up. We need to just understand again this whole COVID management in India there is a conflict between the state government and the federal government, and that is one thing which is leading to a lot of investor nervousness, because few states can decide to completely lock down. For example, Maharashtra is one of the most industrialized states of India. With Maharashtra and Mumbai, which the capital shuts down, it does have a big impact on the economy, and a lot of industrial region are situated around these regions. So if one state such as Maharashtra or these big industrialized states shut down, there is definitely going to have an impact on the overall economy, even if the central government decides they don't want to go for a lockdown. And this is what the central government has said repeatedly, that they don't want to go for a national lockdown. But when you look at these provisional lockdowns that's happening, there is definitely concern for investors on how things will pan out.
All right, listening to the four of you from locked down France, a lot of this sounds very familiar to many people here. And of course, it's the question of how fast now you can roll out vaccines. And there too, what we see in the Paris area, the hardest hit part of the Paris area is also the one where there's the lowest inoculation rate. News website Scroll reporting how just outside the Indian capital, the poorest district in neighboring Haryana state has vaccinated less than 1% of its mostly rural population in over 2 months. Rajiv Dasgupta, what do? How do you ramp it up to scale in a nation of 1.3 billion?
Well, the vaccination coverage across states is indeed uneven. It ranges from 3 to as low as 3% to as high as 17% of the population covered. That's the range of population level coverage. There is both a mix of vaccine optimism, particularly among the urban, well-informed, endowed middle class. At the same time, there is indeed a fair bit of vaccine skepticism on the ground. The time is to invest both in social behavioral research as well as into social mobilization to actually improve vaccine uptake. On the other hand, given the capacity to vaccinate per day, with 50,000 plus immunization centers, there is only an uptake of about 3 million per day, which actually means there is a lot of room for expanding the coverage or the uptake, even given within these number of centers, which has actually expanded pretty rapidly. So it is a mixed picture, and again, there are huge district-wide variations, as you yourself said, and therefore, the case is for actually letting states have a lot more decentralized decision-making and strategization to handle their own respective contexts.
All right, we're going to pick up on that point with the rest of our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're looking at India, which has huge prospects for growth, but first has to quickly come to terms with a spike in COVID cases, which has been dramatic. This week, we've been seeing daily infection rates above 100,000. This as the country tries as fast as it can to ramp up vaccines. We're talking about it with Rajiv Dasgupta, who chairs the Center of Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University, also from the Indian capital. Rajat Sethi, advisor to the Chief Minister of the northeastern border state of Manipur. From the economic capital, Mumbai, Divya Rajagopal, senior assistant editor at the Economic Times. And from Washington, D.C., Irfan Nuruddin, who is director at the South Asia Center at the Atlantic Council think tank. The Serum Institute of India, which produces a lot of vaccine, has now asked the government for a huge grant, 30 billion rupees, to increase its capacity to make AstraZeneca's vaccine. This as centers seem to be inoculating, if you listen to the head of Maharashtra state, faster than labs can produce it.
आज महाराष्ट्र में 14 लाख वैक्सीन का स्टॉक उपलब्ध है और अगर हम 5 लाख के रेट से पकड़ते तो 3 दिन का ये स्टॉक है। मैं ये चाहता हूं कि इमीडिएटली ये स्टॉक बढ़ाना चाहिए और ज़्यादा ये रखना चाहिए।
So Irfan Nuruddin, what's the if you were to roll back the calendar to a year ago, and if you had heard what you just heard just before the break, that in some parts already something like 17% of the population is vaccinated, you would have said, wow, wouldn't you? Is it the news good or bad when it comes to the pace of vaccination?
Well, I think, to be fair, it's probably good. I mean, the scale of the vaccination challenge for India is unlike anywhere in the world, right? We simply do not know what a logistics nightmare it must be to imagine putting shots in the arm of the better part of 1.3 billion people. And we've got to remember that the vast majority of that 1.3 billion people are young, under the age of 30, under the age of 25 is about 60% of the Indian population. So the priority in the early days was first responders and older people. The bulk of that population, though, was supposed to be safer, was supposed to be slightly more protected. And so it's understandable that they were the last priority. But look, the ramping up of production is critical. The government made a couple of strategic choices that I think hard questions need to be asked about. Why wasn't Pfizer encouraged to come in, even though they wanted to? Why was Sputnik 5, the Russian vaccine, denied emergency use authorization? So the bets were placed on the domestically produced vaccines, which are incredible achievements for a developing country. But at the same time, the vaccine diplomacy strategy of the government means that a large amount of that production is being delivered in other parts of the world, which speaks highly of the government's commitment to a global solution to this, but it's going to raise some very awkward questions at home as to why more production wasn't being put into the arms of Indian citizens at a time when it seemed like maybe there was slight room to do that because it seemed like the curve had been flattened, as it were. So on the one hand, yes, glass half empty, glass half full. There's a tremendous achievement in a very difficult place to do this, but it seems like there were some really great missed opportunities that, given the latest spike, the government might yet rue, and definitely to the disadvantage of the citizenry.
Rajat Sethi, you agree?
Well, I do not agree. I mean, it just belittles the scale with which India is grappling with. Let me give you a small context here. Serum Institute actually manufactures somewhere around 65 to 70 million doses a month. And their CEO came out and said that if we were to produce 100 million doses by the end of May, every month, we would require an additional capital requirement of around 500 million US dollars. Now, put this in the context with the number of requirements of these dosages within India. India has said that anybody above the age of 45 years can get inoculated, can get the jab. That number amounts to around 400 million people. As we speak right now, India has been able to successfully vaccinate, even if it is one vaccine, one dosage of the vaccine in a majority of the cases. India still has administered around 100 million doses so far. So India is 1/4 in its target of successfully inoculating 400 million people. So look at the sheer scale. It's not just one dose. There are other dosages which are homegrown, which are not just catering to India's own population, but India and its current regime thinks that they have the moral responsibility to serve not just India and Indians, but all through the world. And let me tell you here that there have been around 18 poor countries across the world which are getting their very first set of doses from India. India cutting into some of its own requirements and delivering this broad message of brotherhood across the world. And I think this is something that not even some of the most developed countries in the world are currently have the capacity to do.
Yeah,
So,
India, like the European Union, exporting vaccine, but they're putting a hold on it now because of the fact that COVID is so rampant until June at the earliest.
No, they are not putting on hold. I mean, the government of India made this clarification that though certain newspapers are carrying this report, this is not true. India is still, and as we speak, even today, they sent out a few 100,000 doses to one of the African countries. So it is still getting exported out of the country, and no poorer countries are going to suffer because of this. But we also need to understand that India needs to inoculate 400 million people. The capacities have to be increased. There are more vaccines which are in the pipeline, more companies which are going to get approvals in the near time. And all of this is going to simultaneously address the problem of the scale that India is going to vaccinate in the next couple of months.
Divya Rajagopal, what is the state of play as you see it?
Well, I think if at this point of time, India seems to have dropped the ball on vaccination. It seems like we started off really well, but if you look at states are running out of vaccines. This is a fact that people have to sort of admit, and I think a lot of government administration do not want to accept the fact that we are running out of vaccines. It was always known that the vaccination is going to take time for a country like India. last year we had reported that the experts had said that at least it would take end of 2021 for 20% of the population to get vaccinated. We are at the beginning of 2021. However, at this stage, we are seeing that the companies such as Serum Institute and Bharat Biotech, which are the only two companies that have the vaccine, they do not have that many capacity to meet the demand that is coming up right now. India's diplomacy of giving away vaccines to rest of the world started off really well. There has been, the exports have slowed down. And I think this is something which Mr. Rajat seems to be saying that papers are lying, but this is not the case. Gavi, which is coordinating the entire COVAX alliance, has told all the countries who are supposed to get vaccines from India that there will be a delay because the export licenses are not coming in. So this is not something that the media is writing on their own, but this is a publicly available fact. So
you're saying exports are slowing down. Divya, we're having apologies for this sound issues. It seems with your connection. We're going to try to have that fixed. Maybe call you back and get that fixed. There's been concern over the last couple of days. The most recent example of it coming from the African Union this Thursday, announcing it's exploring options with U.S. pharmaceutical giant Johnson & Johnson and dropping plans to buy AstraZeneca vaccine from the Serum Institute in India. As a result, what is the state of play when it comes to how much vaccine Rajiv Dasgupta should be for Indians and how much should be for the rest of the planet? Because it's understandable if you're the leader of a country that needs to vaccinate its own people, that you're going to put yourself first.
Well, it was never an easy choice. I think what needs to be understood in a little more nuanced fashion is that India actually made two streams of exports, if I may. One is the global commitment to the COVAX initiative of the WHO, which serves 92 odd countries which either do not have production capacities or purchasing capacities. So that, in one sense, is an international commitment to vaccine equity, which is actually a must for all member states of the WHO, which actually have a whole lot of production capacity, as India's case is. The second is called the Vaccine Maitri, which is actually the friendship component or the diplomacy component, which entailed export to non-COVAX countries. And this is relatively a smaller quantity. This is not a very large quantity, relatively speaking. But the two put together is certainly an export or a shipping out of the country commitment that India did. The challenge not is an either or, because vaccine equity is essential both in a global context, this being a pandemic, as well as in a national context. The real challenge is, as news from the ground indicates, particularly in several states, of stockouts or near stockouts, or at least the reserve vaccine stock dwindling. And that's something that's going to worry us for quite a few weeks now. May not be equally across all the states, but in the case of at least some states, there wouldn't be a very comfortable buffer stock in the reserve. And that's really something many of these states and districts will have to cope and play around with in the coming few weeks. However, this is actually going to stabilize over the next 2 months. And the plan that the Indian government has will actually lead to a comfortable situation. And as some government representatives actually indicated over the last few days, a lot more opening up in terms of age groups and beneficiary groups. But it's really the next few weeks or even a couple of months that's really a tricky situation which one will have to bridge with some very careful balancing.
All right, it's going to be a tricky couple of weeks. The vaccines are being ramped up. It's the same message, by the way, we're getting here in Europe. And in spelling out priorities for the planet to recover, the head of the International Monetary Fund is not reasoning in weeks or months. She's reasoning in years, and she's urging against export controls.
Vaccine policy is economic policy. Faster progress in ending the health crisis could add almost $9 trillion to global GDP by 2025. Best value for public money in our times. But this window of opportunity is closing fast.
Irfan Nuruddin, what does she mean when she says that it's a window of opportunity that's closing fast?
Well, I think the point made by the IMF chief is that once the more and more countries that have still not fully experienced the brunt of the COVID virus begin to lose their health systems under the incredible strain that we see even in the most developed parts of the world, where how quickly, within the space of a couple of weeks, entire health systems are completely overwhelmed, playing catch-up to that once the virus is spreading, once it's begun to mutate within a local population, means it becomes pretty impossible to get caught up. So on the one hand, what the world has gone through over the last year is traumatic. It's of a scale that none of us could have imagined maybe a year ago today. But we are still early on. The fact of the matter is that there is still a chance, if we can get vaccination protocols right, if we can get vaccine equity right, that we can get the shots and give protection to the vast majorities of national populations around the world. The moment we miss those opportunities, we are playing catch-up because the virus is embedded in communities in a way that makes the health systems buckle under their strain.
Is India playing catch-up right now?
It will close, but yes. India is very much in catch-up mode. And again, with all respect to Mr. Sethi, I do not mean to belittle the incredible challenge of the government, and nor do I mean to suggest that every election rally was a super spreader event. What I'm suggesting is that national leadership of a scale that sends strong signals saying, we're in this together, we're going to act together. For citizens in Bombay and Delhi to be told that they have to be in lockdowns while on their televisions they see images of rallies sends mixed messages. The kind of nuance required to understand why we are suffering while other people seem to be living lives as normal is beyond what is required in this particular moment. We need a shared sacrifice. And the fact of the matter is that the fiscal space required to invest in vaccine production, to invest in income support, to invest in stimulating the economy does not exist. The GST is putting, the goods and services tariff is putting tremendous strain on state governments. So the point of the matter is that incredible challenge. I do not want the job of the national leadership of India. I'm glad to be a think tanker, able to give advice and to give analysis. But the simple fact of the matter, the objective reality is this is an incredible challenge. India has 1.3 billion people who live in incredibly dense circumstances with a very difficult public health challenge. Yes, it's playing catch-up, and the game's going to get away from it very, very quickly. I hope Dr. Dasgupta is right that it's just a couple of months of hard months ahead. I suspect it's the rest of 2021 that India is going to be on the front pages of the newspaper as it struggles to bring this under control.
Wow, because we've just heard the IMF revise upwards the growth projections for India itself to a whopping 12.5%. Rajat Sethi, there's an essential question being posed here, which is, what's the plan for the present to preserve livelihoods, to help people like here in France, in the services sector who are temporarily laid off because shops and restaurants are closed?
Well, you're right, and I think there was a clearly laid out strategy behind creating an economic package which doesn't burden the national government in terms of fiscal deficit, but certainly ensure that especially the ones living below the poverty line do not have to sleep hungry because of lack of livelihood. And a lot of direct cash transfers were actually made in this period, and they continue to be made even during this current financial year. We all understand that IMF projected and gave a projection of 12.5%, which is by actually the only country among the developed and all of the emerging economies which got a big thumbs up from the IMF's projection. No other country has been projected to grow in a double-digit manner. So India does have the pent-up demand to really catch up onto the lag that was induced by COVID. But the second wave holds the key to those prospects. And I think government is acutely aware that managing this current wave and doing it quickly is the need of the hour.
Should India be bolder, like we're seeing in the United States? The numbers being bandied about are in the trillions. The deficits are being allowed to run free. Here in Europe, we've even started to borrow money at the EU level, something that had never happened before.
Well, EU and the US, both of these countries enjoy a certain level of reserve currency luxuries, which the Indian rupee doesn't. So they can't print their way. India cannot print their way out of this mess. They need to be more prudent on how they're spending, and especially the people most in need should get whatever cash transfers the government plans to do. That is of topmost priority, and then the economy has to, really gear up its consumption cycle once again. Provided there are no additional tears from these new waves of COVID. Therefore, the government is right in terms of not ensuring a very rapid knee-jerk reaction and pushing the country into a massive stringent lockdown. That's part A. Part B is to create enormous awareness among the citizenry that COVID isn't over yet, and therefore the night curfews, which doesn't impact the livelihoods, but sends a strong message to the population at large that you need to buckle up for this next phase of fight.
Let's look at the growth figures. The steering committee of the IMF saying that the global recovery is going faster than expected. Again, India's projections, as you can see on this chart, put forth by the Economic Times of Divya's publication, showing how India's gone from -8% last year to perhaps 12.5% this year. And then, the projection, and again, that's a long way off 2022, 6.9% the following year. There you see it compared with China in the US in that graph. Divya Rajagopal, again, the question is, what's India's strategy for rebounding?
Well, the strategy, I think we've been discussing this throughout this evening, is one of the things is that to vaccinate as many people as they can to get out, at least bring the numbers down. But this is a decision that comes down ultimately to the provincial governments in India, because they are the one who can take a call on whether they should go for lockdowns or not. At this point of time, India perhaps need to think about borrowing money. This is something which the direct cash transfers are not enough to the kind of demand rebound that we are expecting. It's not that much that can really take the economy out of where we are right now. So there perhaps needs to be at some point of time, and there is funds available. For example, the World Bank has a COVID fund that it has offered to the Indian government. Now it's up to the government if they want to take it or not. They haven't taken it up yet. So it all comes down to how fast we vaccinate and how soon the cases start dropping. I mean, we're seeing projections are that perhaps sometime during June, July, we should start seeing the peak settling down. But these are just projections. We don't know if that would actually happen. So two key things. One would be to vaccinate as many people as they can. And the second one would be perhaps looking at borrowing and just getting into the stimulus package.
All right, let's hope that Rajiv Dasgupta is right and that it is a matter of weeks waiting on those extra doses of vaccine to arrive to market. I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Rajat Sethi for being with us from Delhi, Divya Rajagopal in Mumbai, Irfan Nuruddin in Washington. We want to thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.